Watch this.
On April 24th,
you will hear argument this morning in case 23-726.
abortion access in Idaho took center stage.
Moyle versus United States and the consolidated case.
In the nation's highest court.
Mr. Turner.
The issue? Whether Idaho's near total abortion ban.
Idaho has the strictest abortion ban in the country.
Interferes with EMTALA, a federal law ensuring anyone's access to emergency medical care.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice.
Josh Turner,
and may it please the court,
representing Idaho, defended the gem state this way.
EMTALA works precisely because states regulate the practice of medicine. And nothing in EMTALA requires doctors to ignore the scope of their license and offer medical treatments that violate state law.
Thank you, counsel.
Representing the U.S.,
General Preliger.
Solicitor General Elizabeth Preliger.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court.
A Boise High grad.
EMTALA's promise is simple but profound.
Her argument against Idaho's law?
If a woman comes to an emergency room facing a grave threat to her health, but she isn't yet facing death, doctors either have to delay treatment and allow her condition to materially deteriorate, or they're airlifting her out of the state so she can get the emergency care that she needs.
It's a situation that prompted this exchange between justices and Mr. Turner.
She's going to bleed to death if we don't have an abortion, but she's not bleeding yet, so I'm not sure.
The doctor doesn't need to have medical certainty. The Idaho
Counsel,
Supreme Court
answer yes
question.
or no. Cannot say that there's likely death. He can say there is likely to be a very serious medical condition, like a hysterectomy, and she can no longer have children. All right? You're telling me the doctor there couldn't have done the abortion earlier?
Again, it goes back to whether a doctor can, in good faith medical judgment.
That's a lot for the doctor to risk.
Well, it's a risk a lot of Idaho's OBGYNs and maternal fetal medicine doctors say they face every day with their pregnant patients. That was just a sample of the nearly 2-hour oral arguments from April. The Supreme Court is expected to rule on the state's abortion ban as it relates to EMTALA before the end of this month, and it could be as early as tomorrow, which is why today we are taking a look back at the impact of those abortion bans in the 2 years since the Dobbs decision, beginning with the bill that seemed to be created in a vacuum until it wasn't anymore, and the unintended or maybe intended consequences since abortion became criminalized in Idaho. On one of the waning days of the 2020 legislative session.
The House will be in order.
About 4 hours and 15 minutes into a 7-hour agenda.
Good lady from District 23.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
House Majority Leader, Representative Megan Blanksma, brought Senate Bill 1385 to the House floor.
Under this new section, those performing criminal abortion will be charged with a felony punishable by no less than 2 years and no more than 5 years in prison.
It would become known as Idaho's abortion trigger law, criminalizing the procedure should the Supreme Court or an amendment to the U.S. Constitution restore such authority to the states. Was there an idea of this will never happen anyway?
I think that was everyone's expectation of Roe in general, right? Is that nothing was ever going to change.
Should it change, Idaho's abortion ban would only allow a couple of exceptions.
1, the abortion was medically necessary to prevent the death of the woman. Or 2, the woman has reported the act as rape or incest that resulted in the pregnancy to a law enforcement agency.
Those opposed to the bill noticed one exception was excluded.
Can you highlight where within the text of the bill it stipulates the health of the woman?
Representative Blanksma couldn't.
Lady from 23.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Because it didn't exist.
Shall Senate Bill 1385 pass?
Still, Senate Bill 1385, Idaho's trigger law.
The vote count shows 49 in favor with 18 against and 3 absent. Senate Bill 1385 has passed the House and we return to the Senate.
Was signed into existence by Governor Brad Little 6 days later.
Here's the scene right now of crowds.
Jump ahead to June 24th, 2022, when the expectation of nothing was ever going to change
Joy that it was finally overturned
did with the Dobbs decision.
Right now, new laws banning abortion are taking effect in several states.
2 months later, on August 25th, after sorting out a couple of early court challenges, Idaho had an abortion ban on the books. However, the law's legal problems were far from over. Just before Idaho's ban was triggered,
today
the U.S. Justice Department filed its own lawsuit against the state, claiming the law violated the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, or EMTALA.
If a patient comes into the emergency room with a medical emergency, jeopardizing the patient's life or health, the hospital must provide the treatment necessary to stabilize that patient. This includes abortion when that is the necessary treatment.
With that filing, a federal judge granted a preliminary injunction, meaning the law could not be enforced while the lawsuit went through the courts. Several appeals courts lifted that injunction, then reinstated it. And then finally, it was lifted again by the highest court in the land when they agreed to hear the case. A legal back and forth that for Idaho's doctors wasn't nearly as difficult to discern as the law itself.
Fetal anomalies don't know any bounds. They don't discriminate against anybody.
Dr. Duncan Harmon works at St. Luke's, and he's one of 5 maternal fetal medicine specialists left in Idaho.
We focus mainly on high-risk pregnancies, which is kind of a loose term, but women with pre-existing or pregnancy-related medical conditions, whether that's somebody with pre-existing diabetes, high blood pressure, they develop preeclampsia,
or they have some sort of autoimmune disease. MFMs are also called on to care for fetuses with anomalies, which are more common than you might think.
Roughly 3% of all pregnancies are affected with some sort of congenital anomaly, and those kind of get filtered into us in our world.
Dr. Harmon says that preventing the death of the mother exception for abortion puts him into an inverse relationship with his patients.
The more close to death someone becomes, the less liability I have of either going to jail, facing a criminal lawsuit, or losing my medical license because that patient was on death's door.
You don't want to get to that.
Yeah, I mean, my Hippocratic oath is to do no harm. I'm not going to sit and wait and watch somebody to become sicker so that I become less liable. I want to act in the best interest of the patient. And so many of those circumstances involve me transferring a patient out of state so they can receive appropriate medical care before deterioration occurs.
EMTALA, Dr. Harmon says, offers some sort of Band-Aid for emergency room doctors, but within a limited time frame.
What about the patient who's not on death's door, but is developing or is headed down the route of developing complications that will ultimately lead to end organ damage or need for transfusion or an ICU admission or a need for dialysis or a need for a hysterectomy and lose their potential fertility in the future? We want to prevent even that from occurring. And so that's where the decision making for us is a bit of a conundrum. And the law says we can provide treatment and abortion if it's necessary to prevent their death. But we're 9 or 10 steps before that potential end outcome. And EMTALA is a small portion of what may help us treat patients appropriately because it's a small window of time, but the bigger and more important change is a health exception.
Several doctors wish that specific concern was considered more closely 4 years ago.
I think knowing what we know now, if we would have just tweaked it a little bit better on the initial move.
That's not all Representative Blanksma would admit about her role in establishing Idaho's abortion ban. How did that come to be?
I was the only woman in leadership, and I was assigned the bill.
You were assigned the bill?
I was assigned the bill. Are we taping right now? Because I just...
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Blanksma says it's not uncommon for important legislation to land in the hands of leadership, but this decision was more about image than influence.
And so one of the discussions was have Megan carry it.
Because you're a woman.
There's a lot to be said for how things look when you're presenting a certain type of legislation. And I think that the optics are just not good when certain members are presenting.
Did it give you pause a second, though, to consider why you were chosen?
Not at the time. I think there was an expectation that I would be asked to do it. And I mean, I could have said no, but it was when you're on the team, so you're working for the team.
Okay, not at the time. Now, in hindsight, how do you feel about that?
In hindsight, I wish we'd had some more information because obviously there's some glitches in it.
How so?
Well, I think that we're looking at, there's so many complications that can happen with a pregnancy, and I think that to put it in black and white is a very difficult job. But I think there were some exceptions that just didn't come up at the time.
What we've heard is it would be a simple solution and changing it from life of the mother to health of the mother.
And see, that's not so simple to move on the House floor, because that's when we get to the sliding scale. I understand what they're trying to say, but it then becomes a very broad definition. And then that's when people start to get nervous about changing the existing law, because they don't want doctors to make an excuse to start performing elective abortions. That's the fear with that language.
Representative Blanksma did try to make clear some of that language.
This is a cleanup of the trigger law that many of us remember well.
In 2023.
We're making sure that there are no unintended consequences related to the law.
House Bill 342 would remove the affirmative defense for the doctor, but that's not all.
And then the addition on page 3, line 18, or to treat a physical condition of the woman that if left untreated would be life-threatening.
The bill.
Is there discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion is carried. It will be done.
Never got a hearing. But about a week later,
these 3 things that it adds are the removal of a dead unborn child.
House Bill 374 did.
Well, the purpose of the legislation is to provide additional clarity, and that's part of why that language was taken out, is because we couldn't provide enough clarity to feel comfortable with what it was.
The language taken out? The part about a condition that left untreated would be life-threatening.
We want to make sure that health of the mother doesn't become so broad that everything becomes an exception to take the life of a potential child. Because unfortunately, there are some who take that position.
374.
Motion passes 11-2.
Pass committee.
Question is, shall House Bill 374 pass the House?
It then passed the House that afternoon.
59 ayes, 1 nay, 10 absent and excused.
And it passed the Senate the next day.
The roll call shows 26 in favor with 7 against and 2 absent.
But it wouldn't be enough to pass muster with Idaho's maternal fetal doctors.
Just to allow patients some sense of grace in a situation of which they didn't choose to be in.
Dr. Harmon says a big part of his job is counseling patients on their options when it comes to managing pregnancy complications or fetal diagnoses. Those discussions, he says, now include a third party.
The third party in the room is the decisions that have made outside of this room that impact what you can and can't do in the state.
And so when you counsel them through this decision, how many times have you had this counseling and actually had somebody say, I need to go elsewhere then?
I mean, tons of times.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, but these aren't stories that come up in the media, because these are very private moments that are devastating to families who have a very desired pregnancy, and it's heartbreaking to them.
We've created some unintended consequences. I think that there are those of us who believe that the docs are covered, but when the doc doesn't believe they're covered, that's where you have the problem, right?
Will it change? Will there be a change, you think?
I don't know. It's just going to take a negotiation, and just the blanket health of the mother it won't move, I don't think, in the next legislature for sure. It has too many consequences, one way or another.
Some of those consequences are being dealt with already.
I think I was aware, but then when you live it, you become really aware.
Pregnant patients are being sent out of state for medical care. Up next, one of them tells us her story.
So we've had 6 just in the first trimester, ironically, of this year.
Since January?
Since January, the first 4 months of this year. We've had 6 versus 1 in all of 2023.
The day before the Supreme Court heard arguments in Mike Moyle versus the United States, Dr. Jim Souza of St. Luke's told us how many women with pregnancy complications have had to be transported out of state to receive medical care. And while he told us 6 St. Luke's patients were transported in just the first 4 months, the statewide number was actually more than a dozen at that time. The next day, right after those arguments were concluded at the Supreme Court, Idaho's Attorney General stepped outside that courtroom in D.C. to say this.
And it's really hard for me to conceive of a single instance where a woman has to be airlifted out of Idaho to perform an abortion. In fact, I have talked to doctors in the ER, the same ER rooms that they're talking about, and they are telling me that they have no idea what this administrator is talking about.
Well, we've talked to several of them, 2 people who have some idea of what Dr. Souza is talking about. It's important to point out those decisions to transport aren't always being made in emergency rooms, but some are. And 2 of those people who have been deep in the middle of making such decisions spoke with us about it.
You must understand that, like, I'm not recommending that they travel out of state. I want to walk them through what their options are.
Dr. Duncan Harmon is one of a handful of maternal fetal medicine specialists left in Idaho.
And I want them to be able to make those decisions.
When it comes to a pregnancy that threatens the long-term health of the mother, Dr. Harmon says those options are limited legally.
Idaho's law and EMTALA are consistent. They both seek to protect the lives of women and their unborn children.
Idaho's Attorney General disagrees, and he doesn't believe pregnant women have been airlifted out of Idaho for emergency medical care.
So I would hate to think that St. Luke's or any other hospital is trying to do something like this just to make a political statement.
Okay, well.
What about a personal statement? One of those wanting to speak her truth.
We were just waiting every month to test and kind of see if we would get lucky, and we did.
Wanted to speak with us anonymously to avoid the attention that could come with sharing her story.
And then you have to wait a while for your first appointment.
Lauren learned she was pregnant with twins about 8 weeks in.
We laid down and the ultrasound technician did her thing and asked us if we were feeling lucky because there were 2 in there.
Twin pregnancies can pose problems, so it's common to be seen by a maternal fetal medicine specialist early on.
Everything's going well as far as we know.
That is, until about 2 months later.
By the time we got to our 18-week appointment, we had identified that I had a shortened cervix, which is very common in twin pregnancies, and so we switched to full-time with MFM.
So basically your body was saying, I'm ready to give birth, but your babies are like, this isn't happening, this is not the time.
Yeah, the babies are like, we don't have all of our little organs developed, we're not ready to leave the womb.
Lauren and her husband weren't ready to face reality.
For a while there, we were leaving every appointment crying because, like I said, this was very much a wanted pregnancy.
2 weeks later, Lauren's cervix was even shorter, which meant emergency surgery.
So it's called a cervical cerclage.
It's a stitch to keep the cervix closed, a kind of last resort to keep her twins from being born too soon.
So 24 weeks would be viability, and so we were really hoping that the surgery would be successful, there wouldn't be complications, and then we'd get to stay pregnant into viability.
The stitch is not without its potential for problems either.
Yeah, so I woke up one morning in a pool of blood in our bed and naturally freaked out and went to the emergency room.
Lauren was only 21 weeks pregnant.
With the bleeding, I think the primary concern there is placental abruption.
A condition which can quickly be life-threatening to both the mother and the fetus.
Like, we don't know which way this is gonna go. Like, nobody can say for certain, and we don't wanna put you as our patient in a position where you've run out of time to receive stabilizing treatment that is not legal here in Idaho.
So you spent a day at the hospital mulling your options, and you decided we need to go elsewhere.
Yes, and not even we need to go elsewhere because we have this decision made, but we need to go elsewhere where we have some options while there's still time to make some options.
Lauren was strapped to a stretcher and airlifted to Utah that evening. That's usually reserved for somebody that's kind of in a position like this is an emergency.
Yeah, so definitely they weren't going to discharge me and let us figure it out on our own. So
in Salt Lake City, Lauren says she was given her options once again. This time, they included the possibility of terminating the pregnancy.
There was still a hint of hope for stabilization, which ultimately did end up happening for us. The bleeding ended up slowing down and stopping, but we still spent 11 inpatient days out of state.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, especially when it's not specialized care that I shouldn't have been able to receive in my hometown, you know?
Lauren was in a hospital bed in another state.
What this is about.
The day Idaho's Attorney General said this from the Supreme Court steps.
In my opinion, if somebody's being transferred out of the state of Idaho whose life is in jeopardy, that actually doesn't conform with their practice and the things that they're supposed to be as doctors.
I'm like, I'm one of those in that statistic. Like, I was one of them. So it was definitely a huge slap in the face.
Why did you want to share your story?
I think it's important that people know what could potentially happen to them, you know, even if they think everything's fine after 12 weeks. Any family considering getting pregnant in Idaho should be aware of what could happen to them.
Lauren is now 32 weeks into her pregnancy and doing pretty well. By the way, they haven't even seen a bill for this transport to Utah. Lauren knows sharing her story won't change the minds of those with deeply held beliefs against any abortion. But she does hope those somewhere in the middle of that spectrum will at least acknowledge some grace needs to be given to a doctor and a patient who are faced with making this difficult decision. She wants people to know this is why elections matter. We did ask to speak with Attorney General Labrador, but we were told he wanted to wait until after the EMTALA decision comes down. We are continuing our look at the impact of Idaho's abortion laws in the 2 years since the Dobbs decision. Soon after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, Idaho's 2 overlapping abortion bans took effect. The near total abortion ban passed in 2020, and the 6-week heartbeat ban passed the following year only allow abortions in cases of rape or incest reported to police, and if the life, not the health, but if the life of the mother is at risk. Doctors could be fined or put in prison if they perform or assist in an illegal abortion. In the EMTALA case before the Supreme Court last month, which we're waiting to hear what they decide, the state of Idaho argued its law allows doctors to perform abortions in almost every case where the mother's health is at risk. However, several doctors disagree, and they, along with several women, have signed on to be plaintiffs in several lawsuits claiming the laws are confusing, inconsistent, and prevent pregnant Idahoans from receiving the medical care they need in times of crisis. Here's Morgan Romero with the mother's perspective.
I am a stay-at-home mom, and my husband does work.
Rebecca Vincent Brown and her husband wanted to take the next step in their journey as a family.
We had been trying for about a year and to grow and expand our family from 1 to 2.
They found out she was pregnant with their second in November of 2022.
We were ecstatic, absolutely ecstatic.
The house will be in order.
3 months after Idaho's total abortion ban took effect. At the time, all abortions were outlawed. No exceptions.
I didn't think that that ban would affect me at all. And when it did, it was shocking and quite infuriating.
At 16 weeks, an ultrasound revealed some devastating news.
It was at that time that we knew it wasn't okay. You know, our baby, something was wrong with our baby.
The maternal fetal medicine specialist diagnosed their baby with triploidy, an extremely rare, life-threatening genetic condition. It usually leads to miscarriage or early death.
How did they phrase that? I don't have the exact words, but it was along the lines of there's no medical intervention that can save this baby.
What was that feeling like?
Heavy. Like you drop a rock and the earth stood still. This was our second pregnancy and a planned for wanted pregnancy.
Jelaine St. Mitchell's pregnancy went smoothly.
I felt so good about that pregnancy.
Until late November 2022.
And then at our 20-week anatomy scan is when we found out that things were not progressing the way that they should have. We were told that our baby was not developing properly. So many organ systems were involved at a very, very severe level.
Like Rebecca, Jelaine was told her baby likely wouldn't survive. The women also learned their health was at risk.
If I were to continue the pregnancy with the baby, that it would give me at higher risk for preeclampsia or hemorrhage or any other medical risks with miscarrying. There was another diagnosis of fetal hydrops, which could have potentially impacted my health down the road, too.
By increasing her risk of pregnancy-related high blood pressure, Rebecca and Jelaine's providers told them their options were limited.
She said, if you want, more imaging, I can give you a referral for pediatric specialists. You can continue your pregnancy, and chances that it miscarries. Or you can have an abortion.
Those risks to their health, coupled with their baby's conditions, led them to make the difficult decision to get an abortion.
We knew what we wanted to do, what felt like the most compassionate thing for us, and for that baby and for our family. There's nothing that could give this baby a life at all. And so that's why we decided on that day that we would then go get an abortion.
But getting an abortion in the state of Idaho wasn't an option for them. In Idaho, abortions are only allowed in cases of rape or incest reported to police and to prevent the death of the pregnant woman. The abortion bans don't include exceptions to protect the pregnant person's health. Doctors who perform illegal abortions face threats of losing their medical license, thousands of dollars in fines, and prison time.
Doctors are extremely confused about what type of care is permitted and under what circumstances.
Center for Reproductive Rights attorney Gail Dady says this is leading to patients like Jelaine and Rebecca, who are in medical emergencies, being turned away.
And they are also very fearful of providing even life-saving abortion care in Idaho because they simply don't know what actions may land them in prison.
My life was not currently at risk. What is the level of risk? What is life-threatening? There's no terminology saying what is and what isn't.
Rebecca and Jelaine had to scramble to find clinics out of state that could take them quickly and perform abortions later in their pregnancies. They say their insurance didn't cover their expensive procedures in Oregon and Washington and would have in Idaho. They also had to pay hundreds of dollars for travel and hotels. But the worst part was the lasting trauma of their experiences.
I had to be there by myself to go through it all, and it was really, really devastating. I think that's the hardest part of it all, is not being able to grieve with my husband, and him not having the chance to say goodbye. That was taken from him because we had to go out of state. I started contracting right around midnight. We gave the on-call doctor a call, and he's like, just hang tight.
Rebecca's procedure required 2 steps over 2 days. But after the first step, things took an unexpected turn.
Right around 4 o'clock, I ended up passing the baby in the hotel bathroom. All while my 2-year-old was on the other side of the door. The trauma of the whole situation would not have happened if I stayed in Idaho with my physician at home.
What did they say they could have done for you if abortion had still been legal in Idaho?
I would have been able to have the procedure in the hospital. It wasn't until I returned home and kind of processed everything that I realized just how insane it was that we had to do it in that way, and how degrading it was to have to flee from my home. I remember telling my husband, there has to be a purpose. I'm going to make this really terrible experience mean something.
When she found out the Center for Reproductive Rights planned to sue the state and Board of Medicine over Idaho's strict abortion bans, she realized that was her purpose.
This is my purpose. This is the reason for this.
Rebecca's OBGYN told her about the lawsuit a few months after her abortion. She says it spoke to her.
That was when I decided that it was time to do something.
They're suing on behalf of patients and doctors looking for clarification from the courts.
Like Idaho.
Dady, the lead attorney on the case, says they want to add exceptions to the bans to ensure providers can perform abortions to preserve a pregnant person's health and safety, including when the fetus is diagnosed with a deadly condition.
It's simply a statement that if someone is experiencing an emergent medical condition, meaning they have a condition that could result in significant harms to their health or their life or their future fertility, that person be permitted to have abortion care in Idaho.
Jelaine and Rebecca were able to get pregnant again and fulfill their dreams of growing their families.
And unfortunately, I kind of didn't allow myself to feel bonded with this pregnancy, which is really sad to think about. It's changed now. I didn't emotionally get excited about little baby Harlow until about 20 weeks when we had that ultrasound.
They hope by expanding the exceptions, other Idahoans won't endure the same pain and trauma they did.
If it can happen to us, it can happen to anybody. It's quite barbaric. We live in the 21st century. Why is this happening? We were going to name the baby Beckett, and we've tried our best to talk about her and, make sure Finley knows that she's real. We just never want to forget her, and we're really hoping that her life has purpose in this way, that we can honor her, and that hopefully because of our story and others like ours, we can make life better for women in the state.